In the gleaming towers of Manhattan, billionaire tech mogul Daniel Hawthorne had everything: fortune, fame, and a seat at the table with the world's most powerful. But behind the tailored suits and camera flashes, Daniel faced a crisis that threatened to destroy everything he had built. His father's final will included an unshakable clause. Daniel must be married by age 35 to retain controlling interest in the company. With just 3 weeks left and no romantic prospects in sight, Daniel was out of time. His lawyers offered solutions, PR teams suggested fake engagements, but Daniel refused to turn something as sacred as marriage into a transaction. Until he met her, she was pouring coffee at a downtown diner in Brooklyn. Emily Clark, 29, with warm eyes, a faded apron, and a kindness that couldn't be faked. She wasn't famous or rich or connected. She was just real. Daniel had wandered in that morning after a long, sleepless night, drawn in more by the glow of the place than the smell of the coffee. Emily served him like she did every customer, with a gentle smile and a kind word. He noticed her laugh, the way she called the elderly man at the corner booth darlin', and how she made time for everyone, even the ones who didn't tip. On impulse, he returned the next day, and the day after that. Then, with only 10 days left before the deadline, Daniel made her an offer that shocked them both. "I need a wife. For a year, it's business, but I'll compensate you fairly. There's no catch, just, please hear me out." Emily laughed at first. "You want to marry me." But Daniel wasn't the arrogant billionaire she expected. He spoke with a quiet desperation and an honesty she hadn't seen in a long time. He told her the truth about the clause, his fear of losing the company, and how he couldn't bring himself to marry someone for show. "I just need someone real," he said, "someone kind, someone like you." She thought he was crazy. But something in his eyes told her he wasn't lying. She agreed, not for the money, but because she believed in second chances, and maybe, because something in her heart stirred too, they married quietly. No headlines, no fanfare, just two strangers trying to protect what mattered to them. The first few weeks were awkward. He was used to boardrooms, she was used to broken coffee machines, but as the days passed, something began to change. Daniel learned to slow down. He'd come home to find Emily reading on the balcony, or dancing barefoot in the kitchen. She taught him how to cook grilled cheese, burnt the first few tries. He showed her his favorite spot overlooking the city skyline. They laughed, fought, talked late into the night. She saw the boy behind the billionaire. He saw the woman whose soul shone brighter than any spotlight. But just as things began to feel real, the world found out. Paparazzi swarmed her workplace. Headlines labeled her a gold digger. Daniel's board questioned his judgment. Old friends turned cold. It hurt. But not as much as Daniel's silence. Emily packed her bags. "I didn't marry you for your money," she said through tears, "but I won't stay where I'm not defended." Daniel realized he had built empires, but never learned to protect the one thing that mattered most. He called a press conference, not to save his company, but to save his heart. He stood in front of the cameras and said, "I married a stranger, but in the days that followed, I fell in love with her strength, her spirit, her goodness. If that costs me my company, so be it. But I will not let the world tear down the only real thing I've ever known." The room fell silent. The twist: his act of love saved his company. Investors rallied. The board reversed their decision. And for the first time in years, Daniel didn't feel like he was fighting alone. 1 year later, they stood at the same altar. This time, not for business. Not for inheritance. He had built an empire from scratch. Daniel Hawthorne was the kind of man whose name alone could shift markets, whose decisions rippled across boardrooms from Wall Street to Silicon Valley. By 34, he had been on the cover of Forbes *, featured in every business journal imaginable, and was hailed as the visionary of his generation. People admired his mind, his decisiveness, his unstoppable drive. but few ever saw the man behind the billion-dollar persona. In truth, Daniel lived in the echo chamber of efficiency, where feelings were liabilities and relationships were distractions. His world was clean, polished, predictable, until everything began to slip. It started with his father's will. A brilliant but stubborn man, Richard Hawthorne, had spent a lifetime building Hawthorne Global, and while he admired his son's intelligence, he always doubted his emotional maturity. His will made that doubt very clear. Daniel could only retain full control of the company if he was married by his 35th birthday, no exceptions, no loopholes. Daniel, blindsided, considered the clause an insult, a final, posthumous attempt to control his life. But with just weeks left and no realistic options, he found himself cornered. Legal battles would drag on for years. His board was growing nervous. Investors whispered about instability. The empire he built was slowly slipping from his grasp, not because of a failed merger or a bad deal, but because of an outdated condition in a document written by a man who no longer breathed. His advisors pushed solutions. A marriage of convenience, a PR-arranged engagement with a celebrity, a private arrangement with a willing socialite. Names and numbers were thrown around like options in a business proposal, but something in Daniel resisted. He didn't know if it was pride, or principle, or something deeper he couldn't yet name, but he refused to fake the most personal decision of his life. In frustration, he left his high-rise office one morning and walked aimlessly through the streets of Brooklyn, far from his usual haunts. He needed air, clarity, something real. That's when he saw the diner. It was nothing special, small, a little worn, with fogged-up windows and a chipped neon sign that buzzed faintly in the morning drizzle. But something about it made him pause. Maybe it was the warmth inside, or the quiet hum of laughter from within. He stepped inside, unnoticed by most, and slid into a booth. The woman who brought him his coffee didn't recognize him. She didn't ask for his autograph. She didn't care about his net worth. She smiled as if he were just another customer, tired, maybe a little lost, and treated him with the same kindness she gave everyone. Her name was Emily. She had soft eyes, tired hands, and a quiet confidence that came from someone who had known hard days and survived them. She called him Sir, even after he told her not to, and when she saw him staring into his untouched coffee for too long, she asked, "You okay?" and meant it. He came back the next day, and the day after. He told himself it was because the coffee was good, or the atmosphere helped him think. But deep down he knew the truth. He felt something around her he hadn't felt in years. Calm. Humanity, simplicity. She didn't ask what he did for a living. She didn't try to impress him. She just listened, smiled, and lived her day with quiet strength. After a week, with just 10 days left before the deadline, Daniel did something even he thought was insane. He asked her to marry him, not in a grand romantic gesture, not with a ring or fanfare, just two people sitting across from each other in a booth with the hum of an old jukebox in the background. "I know this sounds crazy," he said, his voice low, almost ashamed. "But I need to be married to keep my company. I won't lie to you. This started as business, but I see something in you that I trust, something real. If you say yes, I'll make sure you're taken care of, and if you ever want out, no pressure, just say the word." Emily stared at him, stunned. She could have laughed. Most people would have. She could have walked away and never looked back. Emily had never believed in fairy tales. Life had taught her early that dreams often come wrapped in unpaid bills, missed buses, and double shifts that left your feet numb by nightfall. She had worked at the same Brooklyn diner for almost 6 years, not because she lacked ambition, but because life didn't always bend for ambition. Her mother had fallen ill, her younger brother needed help with school, and dreams of design school were shelved quietly for the reality of survival. But through it all she had never lost her kindness. She smiled even when she was exhausted. She remembered the names of her regulars. She tucked extra napkins into the bags of struggling parents, and made sure the old man in the corner booth got an extra refill without asking. So when the tall, well-dressed stranger started showing up every morning, Emily didn't treat him any differently. He was polite, quiet, always alone. Something about him seemed tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. She offered him a menu and coffee like she did everyone else, not knowing that he was one of the most powerful men in the city. To her, he was just another soul passing through. Daniel returned every day for a week. He didn't say much at first, just thanks and the usual, but over time he started opening up in fragments, a mention of a difficult decision, a quiet comment about trust, an offhand joke that hinted at pressure he couldn't share. He never revealed his identity, and Emily never pried. She just listened, she nodded. Sometimes she refilled his coffee before he asked, sensing he needed a moment to gather his thoughts. There was no flirtation, no expectations. Just simple human connection in a world that often lacked it. The seventh morning he walked in differently, slower. He looked at her with an intensity she didn't quite understand. After a few minutes of awkward silence, he finally spoke. "I know this sounds impossible, but I need to ask you something, and I need you to let me explain before you say no." Emily blinked, unsure if he was joking, but something about his tone was serious. Daniel explained everything: the will, the deadline, the company, the fact that he couldn't bring himself to enter into a fake marriage with someone who wanted something in return. He told her he needed a wife, not for love, not yet, but for legality. And that, for reasons he couldn't entirely explain, he thought of her, not because she was convenient or quiet or easy, but because in her presence he felt human again. She stared at him, stunned. Her first instinct was to laugh. The idea was absurd. Marry a stranger, a customer, someone whose last name she didn't even know. But he wasn't pushing her. He wasn't selling anything. He looked embarrassed, maybe even ashamed. Vulnerable in a way few powerful men ever allowed themselves to be. "I'm not asking you to pretend to be in love," he said. "I just need someone I can trust, someone kind, someone who doesn't want anything from me." Emily leaned back, trying to process what was happening. She didn't care about his wealth or his position. In fact, now that she knew who he was, she was more uncomfortable than before. But as she looked at him, really looked, she saw the sincerity in his eyes. Not manipulation, not arrogance, just a man who had built a kingdom and suddenly realized he had no one to share it with. Still, the risks were enormous. Her friends would call her crazy. Her life would be turned upside down. She didn't want money or fame, but something about his offer wasn't about those things. It was about trust, about belief, about stepping into something unknown, not because it promised safety, but because it offered truth. And the strangest part, she wasn't scared. For reasons she couldn't explain, Emily felt calm. Maybe it was his honesty. Maybe it was the way he looked at her without judgment. Or maybe, deep down, she was ready for a life that wasn't defined by the four walls of a diner and the weight of responsibility. She didn't say yes that day, but she didn't say no either. She asked for time. A few days to think. Daniel nodded. No pressure, no demands, and for the first time in years Emily allowed herself to imagine a life beyond survival. Not a fairy tale, not a fantasy, just something new.